So, smile. Yes, we are live. I'm here in the name of Fundação Estudar to thank Mário and the Grupo Especial de Saúde of Leaders Estudar for organizing this event, and Professor Libby for being here and preparing this exceptional lecture for us. We are very excited. And please, everybody on YouTube, feel free to post questions on the comments that I will translate it and bring here to the professor. And people on Zoom, also feel free to write down the questions on chat or raise your hand. And when Mario is ready, he will ask you to make your question for the professor on your microphone. So thank you very much for everyone here. And Mario, please take.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mario Murakami. I'm a medical student at the University of São Paulo and a 2019 Estudar Fellow. And on behalf of Fundação Estudar, it is a great honor to welcome Professor Peter Libby. Professor Peter Libby is the former chief of cardiovascular disease at Brigham and Women's Hospital and professor of cardiovascular disease at Harvard Medical School. He's considered by most cardiovascular societies to be the most important researcher on atherosclerosis today. And now he's going to present a lecture on insights into the future of health for our students at Fundação Estudar here in Zoom and the other students connected on YouTube. Once again, Professor Peter Libby, thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and I will turn the call over to you.
Great. Well, I'm very excited to be here. Let me share my screen and we will get the technical aspects going here. Great. Well, I hope everyone can hear and see. It's really a great pleasure for me to be invited by the Fundação Estudar to speak, but I was given an impossible topic, and that is the future of medicine. Now, when you give a professional talk these days, you need to give your disclosures. And usually the disclosures are financial disclosures. But in this case, I have a disclosure that I don't have a crystal ball. So I really don't know the future. But, you know, to frame the challenge, and I'm going to try and challenge you today, we have to prepare best for the future by considering the past. And when I say past, I mean really the past. This is an artist's depiction of the academy, the original academy in Athens, Greece, which was the birthplace of democracy, which is relevant to our discussion tonight. And we see Plato and Socrates, and Plato wrote down the wisdom that Socrates elicited through the dialogues that he had at the academy. This is what the academy looks like now. You can visit it today, and you can only imagine the echoes of the past that happened in this special site. Well, for millennia, academicians have debated among themselves about the gap between science and humanism. The very word academy comes from this place in Greece. Now, I'm not going to take you through the intellectual history of this dichotomy between science and art. But this is taken from the Wikipedia page on positivism. And it talks about ancient quarrel between philosophy, and that would be science, and poetry, and that would be art. And in Plato's dialogues, he, in many places, as you see, talked about this tension, this dichotomy. And of course, the Germans were great students of antiquity, and they talked about Geisteswissenschaft, or the humanities, versus Naturwissenschaften, the natural sciences. And through the centuries, this dialogue took different forms. I'll talk about Renaissance France in a bit, but Auguste Comte in France at the middle of the 19th century was convinced that science and technology had the answer. And there was a great deal of faith in progress around the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And the concept then was that science really had the answer to progress for humanity. But I want to play out with you the proposition that we professors in the academy are missing a point, and that has very serious consequences for society and for public health and medicine. Now, the formulation of the great French mathematician and philosopher and theologian Blaise Pascal was to talk about two types of mind. And he called them in French the esprit de géométrie and the esprit de finesse. The esprit de géométrie was, of course, mathematical, what the science, the hard science, that he said was tangible, but far away from ordinary experience, that is, the people. Mathematics was only for the scholarly, the educated. And then he talked about the other side, the esprit de finesse, which he said was sort of anecdotal, or the experience, what you could see with your eyes, devant les yeux, he said. And in the last century, one of the most important intellectuals who formulated this dichotomy between science and humanism was C.P. Snow, who wrote a very influential book in the middle of the last century called The Two Cultures. And he talked about the dichotomy between science and humanities and said that we'd been split into two cultures and that this division was a major handicap to solving the world's problems. So the proposition I'd like to play out with you for the next 15 minutes or so is that as a community, we in medicine, we in the academy, the medical schools and universities, we have failed to connect with important segments of the population. And this failure is not just an academic concern of theoretical consequence, but it is absolutely existential for the future of the species and the future of the planet. And I would like your help in trying to figure out how we can do better. Consider public health. We're living through a once-in-a-century pandemic, and vaccines, mass distancing behaviors have become politicized. And we see the esprit de géométrie in conflict with the esprit de finesse. And that is a present danger to health, as you in medicine have witnessed firsthand during this pandemic. And then there's the destruction of the planet. We have only a few hours left to arrest global warming, to stop defacing the environment. We deface the environment around the world, but you all know about deforestation in the Amazon and the fires, which are defacing our planet. And I think that the solutions to these problems require us to get out of the academy and to overcome the dichotomy that has opened up. So I think that we're at a tipping point. You know, populism has always been present, but I think that the gap has widened between a fact-based scientific culture, which is equipped to deal with these challenges of pandemics, this pandemic, the next pandemic, is equipped to deal with the hazards to the environment which human activity presents, and on the other side, a pre-scientific mentality that is grounded in rumor, superstition, anecdote, and conspiracy theories. And this unfortunately applies to North America and to your country as well, as we've seen recently. So the inattention that we've had to listening to the concerns of the greater population, not people in our little cloistered environment of the university, of the academy, has led to rejection of scientific solutions. We talked about the COVID-19 pandemic with the anti-vax movement, the anti-mask, the anti-isolation, the false remedies that have been promoted by leaders in North America and in South America, and the global warming crisis. So this is, we're now living through one pandemic, but believe me, there will be another pandemic. And the global warming crisis, if we don't deal with it really quickly, it's going to ruin the planet for your generation and those that come. And one of the reasons I think that this gap has widened is because of social media. And I think that the social media have really contributed to resurgent populism. So why has trust in science and medicine eroded? And, I guess the people on YouTube can't interact here, but maybe those who are on the Zoom could unmute and help me by telling me why they think that we have lost the trust of such an important part of our population in science and medicine, this edifice that we've spent centuries building and that we're so proud of. But it does no good if we can diagnose and treat, if we can prevent, if people will not behave in accord with scientific principles. So anyone who's able to unmute, can you help me with some ideas about why trust in science and medicine has eroded?
And I may say, I'm Mario, and hello, Dr. Peter. I may say that science, like information, it was equal to power in the past. So keep it in secret was really helpful for the population that had this knowledge. So the part of the population that didn't have this knowledge was every time it feels like without power. And this increased at this time that information spread, and it's really easy to get information on the internet. But this part of the population was separated from the people that has the information from the past, and now they don't believe in the academia. And
so yes, in one word, let's summarize your very cogent comment as arcana. We had our own language, we had our own arcane activities that were too difficult for the populace to grasp. Okay, any other suggestions of why trust has eroded, why we've lost the trust of the greater public? Yeah. I see a hand up.
My nickname is Kaique. My name is Carlos. Maybe easier for you to pronounce.
Hi, Kaique. I can pronounce Kaique.
Oh, fine.
It's sort of like cacique.
Yeah. I have a little gray hair as well, so my answer may be slightly different from others in the call. First, I'm not sure there is erosion in the trust in science and medicine. I would challenge that. I think there might be a very noisy minority in certain places and with a lot of access to the media. And it may sound like it has eroded dramatically, which I'm not sure I agree with that statement. In Brazil, for instance, we have very large numbers of vaccinated. We have a few, probably a minority also, screaming very loud but we don't have resistance for the vaccine. I think we as a population welcome vaccines. In my generation, I'm 56. In my generation, I still saw when I was younger programs to eradicate polio and other contagious diseases. So I think as a population, we welcome that. What I believe there is not an erosion in medicine and science, but on institutions. I believe there are three things that worry me, and I think they may be a good hook for your to your future slides. I think institutions of the 20th century may not be well designed or properly designed for the digital world, for the 21st century. I believe that social media has exponentialized noise in the web. You and I saw the birth of the web, and email and just the internet itself already contributed with a lot of noise. And I think social media exponentialized that noise. And thirdly, I believe leaders formed and educated in the 20th century may not be properly prepared to be leaders in the 21st century. So I think there is a crisis of leadership, of institutions, and both of them exponentialized by an increasing noise caused by social media.
Sure. So you're you're saying that I may be exaggerating the problem because it's a vocal minority that is not trusting in science.
I'm not sure I agree with that statement that you have on your slide. I have the same feeling that it may be eroding, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
It may be a minority screaming.
But you're agreeing with the point on one of my previous slides at the bottom that the internet and social media have definitely given voice to people who are challenging trust in science. So anyway, I made my own little list. We've been guilty of arrogance in science and medicine, paternalism. We use arcane language, and we have been poor in our communications with the public. There's been institutionalized bad behavior. I don't know if you're familiar with the Tuskegee experience, but this was a medical experiment done in the last century, middle of the last century, when African-American men with syphilis were observed to learn the natural history of the disease rather than given a potential cure. This led to deep distrust in the part of African-Americans for organized medicine, and is one of the reasons that the low vaccine rates in certain parts of our population are happening. And then there's atrocities like the Mengele in Nazi Germany, who's performing human experimentation that was totally unethical. So we've been guilty of bad behavior. There's the sword and plowshare dichotomy. Do we use science to better humanity or to build better war machines? And I'm going to just exemplify that by mentioning J. Robert Oppenheimer's ambivalence regarding atomic physics. So people were concerned about science being misused. And there's been a focus on Caucasian males in the academy and in medicine, and on Greco-Roman cultural constructs that really have closed a lot of minds to broader cultural considerations, which are appropriate for the 21st century. And I think that we have not heard or paid sufficient heed to the concerns of the greater public. When I talked about the plowshare versus sword ambiguity, Robert Oppenheimer was considered the father of the atom bomb. And you can see he's here with the blackboard with equations. He was a master of science. And you can see he looks worried. And the reason he was worried is because he was considered the father of the atom bomb. And when the atom bomb was used against people, he famously quoted from the Bhagavad Gita. He said, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." So he really very poignantly showed how science could be misused and should be used for the betterment of humanity. So my proposition is that we failed as a scientific and medical community to connect with broad segments of the population. And although Kaique disagrees, I think that there is evidence for a trust in science and medicine that is eroded. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. Science and medicine can go together. You all know about Leonardo, whose drawing of the aortic valve could be in a textbook today. It's so accurate. And his engineering feats you all know about. But he was a great artist. Well, of course, Leonardo was an outlier, but he certainly proves that this dichotomy between science and humanism really is an artifice and that we should try to overcome it. So how do we respond to the challenges? And let's say for purposes of argument, because Kaique doesn't agree with me, which is absolutely okay, I'd love to debate it, maybe over a caipirinha sometime. But how can we restore, repair public trust in science and medicine to try to preserve the planet and the public health? So let me again open it up to people who can participate, who has some ideas, what we can do to make things better.
Hi, Professor.
Hi, Vinicius.
I feel like people sometimes have very subjective factors that lead to establishing trust. And these factors may not necessarily mean that we trust people that have the trustworthy information or the most accurate information. Sometimes we just trust people or trust information that seem more known or, closer to what we're already used to. And I'm saying that because I feel like communication is something that we in academia could really work on, making sure that our scientific reports or the work we do be more accessible to people and be delivered in a message that is understandable and it's close to people. I feel like communication could be a pathway.
Great. Any other ideas? Well, again, let me share what I was thinking about while I was jogging around this weekend, trying to think about how I could best use this time. Well, Vinicius, you and I agree completely. We need to become better communicators. We need to adjust our language. And I don't know if this has come to Brazil, but one of the things that we're trying to do more in the US in medicine is to use what we call motivational interviewing, where instead of the paternalistic model where we say, here's some pills for you to take to make yourself better, we talk to the patient in a different way. What's your understanding of what's going on? What's your understanding of what this medicine could do? And to dialogue with the patients in a much less paternalistic manner, motivational interviewing. Becoming more inclusive. I think that the evidence is accumulating that having a monolith of Caucasian male culture is not going to succeed with our overall mission, as well as being much more inclusive of people of different sexes, genders, ethnicities, geographical origins. As a response to the traditional paternalism of medicine, which is the way it was when I was growing up, we engage now in shared decision-making with patients, where we inform them and work with them on trying to help them make the decisions right for them. We've been damaged by, we say it takes one rotten apple to spoil the whole crop in the barrel. We've been damaged because of people whose greed has conflicted with their ethical imperative to serve the patient, and There's many stories of financial conflicts of interest. They're the outliers. Most doctors are honest and trying to do their best, but there are some who become very notorious, and that, I believe, can frustrate the public's trust in our enterprise, and you will have your own ideas. So I think that my generation has not done a good job of communicating. And I think that your generation has an opportunity to do better. And that's why I wanted to present this perhaps provocative idea that we're at a point when, particularly with all of this noise that is given wing by the internet, that you guys need to figure this out and do better than my guys. So you probably weren't expecting an intellectual history and sort of global overview of medicine and the challenges, but I wanted to present to you what I see as existential challenges to health and to the planet, and issue a challenge to you to figure out ways to do it better. But now I'm going to close and leave time for talking. I'm going to tell you what you probably were expecting from me if I was assigned to talk about the future of medicine. And obviously there's many aspects, but what I like to deal with in particular is the maturation of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing, and how those are going to transform medicine during your careers. In a few short years, computers are going to be able to evaluate patients, diagnose them, propose management, and avoid human failings, such as the biases that are very well known, the biases that we bring into the room when we're dealing with a patient, the framing biases, the anchoring biases, confirmation biases, premature closure, when we think we've got the diagnosis and we start to ignore some of the contrary information. And computers will be able to propose managements because they will be programmed with the results of all the clinical trials, all the guidelines, and they'll be able to crunch and come up with treatment algorithms that are very informed and very correct. And how do I think this is going to change medicine? I think maybe the first place is in imaging. So I don't know if any of you are going to go into radiology, but I think that already artificial intelligence is able to interpret mammograms better than human doctors. And the computer costs less after the capital outlay, does not need coffee, does not need day off, does not lose attention or get fatigued. So I think that the application of AI and ML that is going to be earliest transformative is going to be in imaging. But the general question is, how can we resolve tension between technology and care of the individual? And that's what I'd like to finish with in my remarks this evening. You know, we're actually in just the infancy of AI and ML. We're in the sort of awkward, gangly adolescence of these technologies. And, you know, informatics was supposed to enable us to spend more time with patients. But I don't know about you, but with the electronic medical record that we're harnessed with in my practice environment, we actually spend as much or more time treating the computer than treating the patient. And right now, doctor might spend more time looking at the screen and his keyboard with his back to the patient, his or her back to the patient. So this is a transitional phase, but in your professional careers, you are students now, this is going to be a revolution and it's going to change everything. Natural language processing is going to make it so that you have a robotic scribe in the interview with you. And you know, the natural language processing is going to draft a note for you. So instead of having to write a note after the patient leaves or while the patient is in front of you by keyboarding, the natural language processing is going to take the information that's exchanged verbally between you and the patient and perhaps family members and synthesize it into a note. So that may be liberating, and it will get better. I mean, I've seen digital transcription go from being horrible to being really useful. And it's only going to accelerate as machine learning and learning systems get better and better. So where does that leave us? If AI and ML are going to be doing better than us, what's our role? Are we just going to become curators of the computers or slaves to the informatics? And of course, none of us entered this profession to become the slaves of computers. This is not a 2001 space odyssey. So how are we going to save the soul of our profession? So I don't know, what do you think? Who has ideas for how we're going to solve this tension between technology and humanism and practice?
Can I respond this one? I'm Mario here. And I think that AI and ML are going to be tools for us. Nowadays, we use most of our time just recording the interview, thinking about the diagnosis, and we have just a little time to take care of the patient, to speak with the patient and care, like with the care, you know. So with AI and ML, we will like save a huge amount of time of the part of the diagnosis and the recording, the prescription, and we will use this time for the patient, to talk with the patient, communicate with the patient. Sometimes the patient even don't know about their own disease because we don't communicate to him here in Brazil. But yeah, I think this is the response. Like we will spend more time talking.
Yeah. Any other comments?
Median here. I also believe, yes, I also believe, as Mario, as soon we realize how it can be beneficial for us, I think that gonna love AI and ML because you're gonna have more time for the patient. So it's gonna be revolutionary.
Right. So that's the promise. Then the promise is being observed now in the breach. That is, the promise hasn't been kept. And I think we're in this transitional phase, but you're absolutely right. I think that we could gain more time, and how are we going to use it? Well, those shared decision-making conversations, I don't see a robot going in and reading the body language of the patient, looking at the patient, seeing how they react, and having an exchange as equals and adjusting your language for the educational level of the person in front of you and trying to make congruent your scientific belief system and the belief system of the person who you're interacting with, which may be different and perfectly valid, certainly for them. I also don't see robots engaging in end-of-life conversations, which are really an important part of what we do. In my specialty of cardiology, particularly in the advanced heart disease section, that is heart failure, there's a lot of conversations about end of life, about aligning expectations with reality, about trade-offs between quality of life versus quantity of life, about when to go for mechanical high technology circulatory assist, when to stop the high technology, when to turn off the defibrillator, for example. So those kind of conversations I don't see happening with a robot, even with advanced AI, ML, and natural language processing. Family meetings. We spend a lot of time in family meetings, especially, again, my heart failure specialty colleagues. And I don't see a computer running a family meeting where there's the cousin who flew in from a distant place, a sister who hasn't been involved in the care of the patient for 20 years, but may disagree with the sister who's been helping the patient on a daily basis. So those kinds of issues I don't see computers doing. And then there's what I was fortunate to be taught when I was in my training, and it's how to use your persona as a medicine to calm and comfort the patient even when you can't cure. And for me, this is the soul of medicine, and this is what we must not give up. So I think that if we master technology instead of being mastered by technology, which is a danger, maybe we will return to our more traditional role, maybe the Hippocratic role, when they didn't have much in the way of effective medicine, but they were able to be healers and guides and partners with individuals as they journey through health and illness. So I think that for me, that would be what we need to do with the time that we save. We need to embrace technology. We certainly shouldn't be Luddite and try to break down the machines. We need to embrace it, wait for it to mature, help it mature, and then instead of running off to the next technical task, to save the soul of our profession, we need to remember how to be healers. And a lot of that we do with our persona, our personality, and can use that as a medicine. So I'm going to bring the formal proceedings to an end. I'm going to say that the Fundação Estudar celebrating 30 years is fantastic. There have been hundreds of people whose lives have been changed. I once went to a fundraiser in São Paulo for Fundação Estudar, where maybe some of you were there, and I heard some of the stories. So, uma rede que apoia, desenvolve e inspira milhões de jovens brasileiros para que sigam seus sonhos e mudem o mundo. And that's what I'm expecting of you, okay? Dream big, sonho grande, and change the world. And I hope that my thoughts at least challenge you to do better than the guys with gray hair. So thank you very much for this invitation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter Libby. This was much better than was thought. Like, it was not what was expecting. You gave like a historical, philosophical, and artistic insight about the future of medicine. It was incredible, and with with debate with people here of the community was really amazing. On behalf of Fundação Estudar, we really thank you about. Thank you very much about the presentation. We have some questions that people sent to us from the community. Can I read them to you?
Sure.
Just a moment. I have to open here.
Yeah, I see the chat, but it looks like just the host chat. So I don't see questions in the chat.
Oh yeah. So the first question is, what are these structural challenges that we need to solve in the next years to increase the access to healthcare worldwide?
Well, I would say that most of the world gets it better than my country. My country has a very fragmented healthcare system, and one that has built-in inequalities. So I think that we need to strive to do much better in the United States. We're the poor country for the way in which we disseminate healthcare. The very best healthcare is available in the United States, but it's not accessible to the majority. And in everything that I'm writing these days, this is the latest edition of the Bromwald Heart Disease. If you read the preface, I strike that note that all of our accomplishments are for naught if we can't get it to people. And I think that the situation with the current Omicron variant is an example of how we cannot have access to healthcare in one part of the world and think that we're insulated, a gated community, that we are protected because we have resources, because we're at the mercy, the virus, this virus or the next virus, pandemic virus is not going to recognize that we have excellent medical care in certain pockets, because the virus will prosper and mutate in places where there isn't access to vaccine, where there are not the structures for allowing access to health on a way that is egalitarian. And Kaique pointed out that Brazil has been really a leader in vaccination. And what happened? Because Brazil really embraced vaccines. And Kaique talked about when he was a kid, he remembers polio vaccination. We now have measles, mumps, rubella, and some of us grew up in a time when these communicable diseases were major issues. And polio and smallpox have been word, but something happened. You need to have a rock song about Butantan to get the public to accept vaccines. And what happened in Brazil was a briga, right, between the Sinovac and the AstraZeneca, and it became politicized. And I remember before you students from Estudar were born, there was an epidemic of meningococcal meningitis. And there was a vaccine that was provided to Brazil by the Mérieux. And I can remember that it was held hostage at the airport. I think then it was Viracopos was the airport. And why? Because the state public Ministry of Public Health and the federal ministry were fighting about who was going to get it. So here was the vaccine, and politics got in the way. But Brazil has done much better than the US in vaccination. And what we need to do is strive together to make structures that will provide access. Part of it is recognition, and the other is working the political system. So one of the goals of Fundação Estudar is to make leaders. Okay? And there are already people who've been through Fundação Estudar who are becoming leaders and who have perhaps worked in systems where there's less corruption and less politicization. I used to think that the United States was an example, but since 2016, we showed that you scratch the surface and we still have the problems of corruption and politicization. And so we just have to keep working. I think one of the ways that we can have more political influence in order to address disparities in healthcare is to rebuild trust, because then maybe if we can rebuild trust, we can elect candidates who are more honest and more science-based. So I don't have solutions. I want you guys to get the solutions. Kaique said that the leaders of the 20th century aren't prepared for the 21st century. So when I was a university student at Berkeley in the 1960s, we said, don't trust anyone over the age of 30. And you know what? I'm older than 30, so you shouldn't trust me.
I trust you, Dr. Peter. Brilliant response. We are seeing now this phenomena with Omicron variant of COVID, countries that don't have access to healthcare, suppress the vaccines, and the mutation is more quick than our solutions because of the lack of access to healthcare, right? So we have other questions. Can I ask the second question? What do you believe are the obstacles to bring user centricity to healthcare industry?
To
bring user centricity to healthcare industry.
To the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
Okay. So I presume that this is medical centers, not the pharmaceutical industry. That the gist of the question. So I think it's actually, Kaique put his finger on it. You need leadership that will have a devotion to a mission of trying to make the healthcare system user-friendly. I said that paternalism was one of the reasons that we may have lost trust with the public. And instead of dictating to the public what they should do, we need to become better listeners. It's interesting, I moved from the city of Boston to Cambridge across the river. And Cambridge is a people's republic. It's where Harvard University is, and it's a very progressive community. And we're going through an interesting exercise in the little town of Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they take part of the city budget and they put it up for vote, what should be done with it. Would you like to have more public bathrooms? Would you like to have more bicycle lanes? And people vote on that. Maybe we need to have more participation in the management of healthcare. We do that in some ways. We have lay people who are part of our Human Studies Committee, okay, to give the perspective. We have, there's a meeting which is just finishing now called the Cardiovascular Clinical Trialists meeting, where they usually have a patient advocate on the panel. Yes, they have the world's expert on the disease, and they have the executive of the pharmaceutical company, but then they have a patient advocate so that they keep us real. So I think perhaps having more of a participatory management would help us to listen, but we have to hear.
Of course, yeah. I agree with you. Like participation is the key for having people deciding like more better decisions. So we have like a third question. Can I ask you?
Sure.
What are the organizations or companies best suited for driving positive change in healthcare? What is special about them?
So what's special about the
organization best suited for driving positive change in healthcare? What's the features about them, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I think having a well-considered mission, a lot of organizations have mission statements, and mission statements really require a lot of thought. They should be short, that paragraph, and every word has to be weighed. So you need to be clear about what your mission is. And, if you've ever tried to craft a mission statement, particularly with a group of people sitting in a room or around a table, as we used to do pre-pandemic, trying to get a consensus and condense it into a few sentences is very difficult. So I think clarity of mission is one important point. And then a mission statement that's just words is worthless. So you need leadership that will actually implement the mission and implement it in a way which is avoids disparities and which is in the 21st century multicultural. And I think that having a clear mission and having leadership that will implement the mission is very important for success of any kind of organization. But the values that are in the mission statement are key. And I think where I stand on some of the values, given the tenor of my conversation.
Yes, perfect. Anyone wants to? I finished the questions that people sent to me. Anita, does anybody have any other questions?
No, on YouTube, we have a lot of opinions and comments, but no questions.
If we have the time, I wanted to ask one quick question. Can we?
Okay. I'm fine. Go on.
Awesome. I just want to bring back the topic that you started the lecture with, the one about the trust in medicine and science and the role of social media in it. Today we have many different media outlets in which people engage with. And TikTok has been increasingly more important, specifically for young people and for spreading news to young people. Given that people that follow Fundação Estudar content usually tend to be a bit younger, what do you feel like is the role of young people and TikTok or any other social media in increasing the trust in medicine and science again, given that they're not researchers or they're not in academia or they're not, health professionals, what they can do to support that?
Right. So I don't have the answer. This is a big public debate now, right? With concerns about postings on Facebook, about censorship, claims of censorship on Twitter. And actually, the only social medium that I use is LinkedIn because it's more professional. And I really restrict my posts to professional matters because, in a way, if you think about it, Twitter caused a lot of trouble in my country because it gave voice to a regime whose values I do not share. So we have to be very careful because it's a balance between free speech and misinformation. And it's not up to one person to make that decision where that pendulum comes to rest. But I do think that we need to have a filter. And, I read recently that Falun Gong is using cute cat videos as a way to hook people on the internet to their sites. And we need to be, as the people who are conveying scientific information, evidence-based information, need to be as clever and as good communicators as those who are unscrupulous in using the media to promote unscientific and perhaps less constructive purposes. So I think this is a societal debate. I don't think it's going to be settled just by government. I don't think it's going to be settled by the social media concerns themselves. Since Facebook got recently some bad publicity and changed its name, there have been a lot of advertisements run by Facebook about how they're trying to be such good citizens and worry about confidentiality and privacy. But I think we need to learn, if we're going to succeed as a society, how to filter information, how to tag misinformation, and how to achieve a balance between freedom of expression and dangerous misinformation. Misinformation which is dangerous, as I've said, to the public health and to the survival of the planet.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, and Anita, if you could save what came in.
Yes, Professor, just one moment.
Would be great.
We have 3 minutes to answer one question that we have on chat.
Yeah.
It's from Arthur Dizenian. He is one of the leaders of Fundação Estudar. He cannot open his mic right now, but he's asking, do you think there are medical specialties and practice scenarios that are more pertinent to AI and technology in general than others? If you want to read, because I think there's a typo here.
So do I think that some specialties are more embracing AI and ML than others? Is that the question?
Yes, I believe so. Mario, if you can read it.
Yes, I think is that's what I understood. Like which one is the specialty that is more of embracing like AI? It's more available AI. I think this is the.
It made more sense now. Thank you.
The imaging specialists are certainly embracing AI and ML, but there are a lot of aspects of medicine that are where there are people who are jumping on the bandwagon of AI and ML. Robotic surgery, for example, is taking off, and that's perhaps not exactly ML or AI, but it's certainly an application of technology that is maturing and becoming amazing. Minimally invasive surgery is an incredible advance, and it's based on technology. So for AI and ML, I would say imaging specialties first. Then, as I said, with natural language processing, it's going to completely change the way in which medical record is developed and our documentation is done probably in the near future. And in my specialty of cardiology, and just by analyzing the usual scalar 12-lead electrocardiogram, it's amazing the information that can be derived from that. You can predict heart failure. You can predict people who will go into atrial fibrillation years before they do. So there's a tremendous amount of information that can be gleaned from some of the information that is collected. So in the new edition of Bromwald's Heart Disease, which was released on November 19th, so less than a month ago, there's a chapter on artificial intelligence done by the Mayo Group. And I would refer you to that chapter because it's really amazing, some of the things that are going on. I'm an executive editor of the European Heart Journal, and so I see a lot of the work that's coming in. So it's from all aspects of medicine, but particularly imaging and maybe electrophysiology are great, have embraced AI and ML. And there's also, by the way, in this book, a chapter on wearables, which we haven't gotten into, but I think wearables may become transformative as well, because we're going to be able to monitor a lot of physiologic functions in real time. And the question is, how are we going to deal with the data and how are we going to act on it? Because the technology is here for us to know a tremendous amount. But then how do we filter it? And how do we act on it? And how, when we make changes in patient management based on input from high technology, be it wearables, be it analysis of imaging and electrocardiograms, we need to do studies that will show we're actually improving outcomes. So there's plenty of work to do in this area for those who want to build the evidence base so that we know how to use the technology wisely and ultimately in the service of the patient. The confidentiality issues are another great problem, and we haven't even gotten into CRISPR and gene editing. And I've just written a piece which is should be up on Practice Update like today, talking about a CRISPR future, where in cardiology, I talk about how base editing for permanent deletion of PCSK9 has been done in primates, how transthyretin can be silenced using CRISPR gene editing. And we have to be very, very careful about the ethics of altering the human genome. And that's a whole other subject. But if you'd like to read some of my thoughts about it, it should be on Practice Update, where there's something like 60,000 subscribers. I think you can subscribe for free. Okay?
I think we are running out of time, right, Anita? And I would like to thank you very much, Peter Libby, for your presence here. It was such an amazing talk with such amazing insights about philosophy, insights of the future of medicine. Technology was really amazing. Like, we passed through so many different fields and themes and topics.
My goal was to provoke some thought and to challenge. Okay? And I think that sort of fits with the ethos of Fundação Estudar. Okay. And a próxima vez vamos fazer isso ao vivo, não é?
Oh yeah, of course. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Libby. It was amazing. Boa noite.
Boa noite, professor.
Grupo de Saúde de Líderes de Estudar, muito obrigada pela organização do evento. Good night, and we hope to see you on next